Vasili Arkhipov was born on January 30th, 1926 in the village of Staraya Kupavna, near Moscow. He graduated from the Caspian Higher Naval School in 1947 and began serving in the Soviet submarine fleet, where he gained experience and rose through the ranks. In 1961, while serving as deputy commander of the K-19 submarine, there was a serious reactor failure. Arkhipov managed the crisis and prevented a meltdown, but the crew suffered severe radiation exposure. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he served as senior officer on the submarine B-59. The submarine was equipped with a nuclear torpedo and was being forced to surface by U.S. Navy forces. Under great pressure, the submarine's captain and political officer were ready to launch the nuclear torpedo. However, Arkhipov opposed the launch and convinced the others to surface and wait for orders from Moscow, thus preventing a possible nuclear confrontation. After the crisis, he resumed his naval career and eventually became a rear admiral. He retired from active duty in the 1980s. Vasili Arkhipov's critical role in preventing nuclear war remained hidden for a long time, but was later recognized by historians and peace organizations. On August 19, 1998, he died of kidney cancer, possibly due to radiation exposure during the K-19 incident. Vasili Arkhipov is remembered for his cool and decisive actions during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which saved the world from a nuclear catastrophe. His story is a powerful reminder of the impact of individual decisions on global events. His legacy is honored by various peace organizations and historical accounts of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a critical event that erupted in October 1962 between the United States and the Soviet Union, bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war. The background and details of the crisis are as follows. In 1962, the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, decided to provide military support to Fidel Castro's government following the failed U.S. Bay of Pigs invasion to overthrow the communist regime in Cuba. Khrushchev decided to deploy medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba in response to the U.S. deployment of nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy that could target the Soviet Union. On October 14, 1962, U.S. intelligence discovered that the Soviets were building nuclear missile launchers in Cuba. When this information was relayed to U.S. President John F. Kennedy, the crisis officially began. In a nationally televised speech on October 22, Kennedy announced that the Soviet Union had installed nuclear missiles in Cuba and declared a naval blockade of Cuba. The purpose of the blockade was to prevent Soviet ships from carrying more weapons to Cuba. Kennedy called on the Soviet Union to dismantle the missile launchers and withdraw the missiles. The U.S. Navy positioned itself on the blockade line to stop Soviet ships heading towards Cuba. As tensions rose around the world, both sides were preparing for nuclear war. During this period, the Soviet B-59 submarine was spotted by the American Navy off the coast of Cuba and forced to surface by depth charges. The B-59 was carrying a nuclear torpedo and was awaiting orders from the Soviet Union because communications had been lost. The captain and political officer of the B-59 decided to launch the nuclear torpedo in response to the American attack. However, Vasili Arkhipov opposed this decision and convinced the others to surface and wait for orders from Moscow. This decision averted a possible nuclear war. At the height of the crisis, intense diplomatic negotiations took place between Kennedy and Khrushchev. On October 28, Khrushchev agreed to dismantle and withdraw the missiles from Cuba. In return, Kennedy assured him that the U.S. would not attack Cuba and made a secret agreement that U.S. missiles in Turkey would also be withdrawn. The Cuban Missile Crisis went down in history as one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. The crisis led to greater efforts for nuclear arms control and non-proliferation. After the crisis, the Red Line telephone line was established to ensure direct communication between the United States and the Soviet Union. Also, in 1963, the Nuclear Test Limitation Treaty was signed. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed that with cool heads and diplomacy, world leaders could avert a nuclear catastrophe. Vasili Arkhipov's role during this crisis is an example that highlights the importance of individual courage and prudence during this tense period. If the Cuban Missile Crisis had not been resolved and a nuclear war had erupted, the world would have faced great destruction and catastrophe. Possible consequences of nuclear war would include first strikes. Both the United States and the Soviet Union could rapidly launch hundreds of nuclear weapons. These weapons would target major cities, military bases, infrastructure, and industrial centers. Millions of deaths. Millions of people would die instantly in the initial explosions. The high heat, pressure waves, and radiation from the explosions would have caused widespread destruction. Long-term radiation. The radiation emitted after nuclear explosions would have caused serious health problems for survivors, with increased cancer rates and long-term genetic damage. Nuclear winter. Explosions and fires would create large amounts of smoke and dust in the atmosphere, which would block sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface, causing global temperatures to drop. This would lead to reduced agricultural production and global famine. Collapse of ecosystems. Radiation and climate change would have wreaked havoc on wildlife and ecosystems. Many animal and plant species would face extinction. Economic collapse. The destruction of major cities and industrial centers would paralyze the global economy. Trade, production, and transportation would grind to a halt. Social chaos. The collapse of governments and infrastructure would lead to a breakdown of social order and chaos. Survivors would struggle for basic needs such as food, water, and shelter. Health crisis. The absence of health care would make it impossible to deal with radiation sickness, injuries, and infections. Collapse of governments. Many national governments would be unable to provide leadership. This would have created a huge vacuum in local and national governments. Change in international relations. A new balance of power would emerge among the surviving states. New alliances and hostilities could emerge. Cultural and psychological trauma. Surviving generations would have suffered great psychological trauma and cultural shock. Societies would feel the effects and losses of war for many years. Stagnation of technological and scientific advances. Scientific and technological advances would come to a standstill. Most advanced technologies and scientific research would be destroyed. In the event that the Cuban Missile Crisis was not resolved, the world would face a nuclear holocaust and experience one of the darkest periods in human history. Vasili Arkhipov's role was critical in averting this catastrophe and changed world history.